Hello and a warm welcome to everybody out there who joins the journal's webinar on Power to X, a vital puzzle in the green energy transition. The process uses electricity to split water into oxygen and hydrogen, which can either be directly used as a fuel or synthesized into other e-fuels for use in aviation, road transport, or industry. Such sector coupling spreads the environmental benefits of zero carbon electricity across the wider economy. So to discuss the process, its scale, scope, and challenges, I'm joined by a panel of experts. From over in Florida, we are joined by Jeff Benoit, Vice President, Clean Energy Solution for Thomson Energy and PSM. Jeff identifies new business for PSM's high hydrogen combustion retrofits. We're also joined by Eric Zindel, Vice President Sales at Siemens Energy. He leads the initiative for hydrogen combustion in gas turbines and also looks out for new business across the entire hydrogen value chain. From Augsburg, Germany, we're joined by Dr. Florian Gruschwitz, Senior Business Development Manager at MAN. He focuses on Power to X solution at an international scale and the consulting business. From Cuxhaven in northern Germany, we are joined by Dr. Carsten Bührer, Head of Technology at PNE. He develops wind, solar, Power to X projects for both electric utilities and the metals industry. And from up in Hamburg, we are joined by Dr. Christoph Weber, co-CEO of Power to X Europe. He is developing and implementing integrated power to liquid solutions for e-fuels, especially for the aviation industry. So thanks for joining us and for being on the panel. And let's get started by asking you, Carsten, to highlight the role of Power to X in the face of the green energy transition. Can it solve the intermittency issues by turning wind and solar power when it's not needed into a storable fuel?
So thank you very much, and hello to everybody listening out there. Power to X, the production of green hydrogen and its derivatives from renewable sources, can certainly solve some of the intermittency issues. In general, it's got 2 points. It's storage of energy, but it also allows tradability across the globe. So now we can take green energy produced somewhere in the world and take it to another industrial place and make use of it. So by that, we can cover intermittency issues of renewables. But in the first instance, we want to decarbonize. So that's our major objective. So we want to have sufficient amounts of renewable energies. And in order to decarbonize our world, to provide power for transport, etc., we need quite enormous amounts. So I brought you some exemplary pictures or figures with me. So if we look at a 1 gigawatt electrolyzer, we will require something like a gigawatt of solar power, a gigawatt of wind power, and that feeds, if we convert it to methanol as a fuel, 10 container ships for a full year. That is not much. So we really need to make sure that we have sufficiently production capacity of renewables available. They will be exclusively producing for green hydrogen.
Yeah. So Carsten, do you agree? Do we have sufficient renewable out there already? Florian, I mean, do you agree?
Yeah,
or
I can.
Do we need to build that up massively?
Yeah, I can fully agree. The renewable energy availability is always the key. And when it comes maybe to address the 2 applications you were asking, which is transport and aviation. When we look at transport, road heavy duty transport, there is always, of course, the option of direct electrification. So battery powered trucks is also an option. So we will see if we have hydrogen and battery driven in the future or both. But what can be said, if there is abundant available renewable energy, then this can be a solution really to decarbonize the sector. When it comes to ocean shipping, also as a form of transport, there we will only see e-fuels, derivatives, and maybe some hydrogen. So yes, this is also a very powerful and effective way of decarbonizing. And last but not least, aviation. When we will see the hydrogen-powered jets is still open, in my opinion, but with quota and mixing of e-kerosene, of course, we have a viable solution to really get the green energy transition, or the green transition, decarbonization, as Carsten said, going.
So, Eric, I take it from Carsten's point, the renewable capacity is a key bottleneck for rolling out the power to X capacity. How much capacity do you see in the pipeline next year and in the years to come? And also, if we're comparing Germany's rush to LNG to fill the short-term gas supply gap, are e-fuels advanced with the same impetus, or how do these two fuels compare?
Okay, thank you, and welcome as well from my side. These are good questions. If we look at the pipeline capacity for Power-to-X projects, what we see currently is quite a lot of demonstration projects. So most of the projects are being currently under construction, already in operation. They are pure demonstration projects without a real commercial business case behind. But we see as well projects now in the pipeline being negotiated, being developed that are already in the triple megawatt or in the gigawatt size range, with already a very clear commercial business case intention. The growth is quite quick, so we see rather exponential growth, but we'll have to see how many of these projects really materialize, because there's always the issue of how can we close a deal financially. We have to remember that these products are usually commodities. Hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives are commodities being used to produce other commodities. So at the end, costs is the most important factor. And if we are not able to get an off-taker for more or less the amortization period of the plant and at fixed prices, then such a project will probably have difficulties in getting a financial close. But at least we're seeing in the pipeline more and more larger projects now being discussed. Looking now directly at Germany and the LNG rush that we're seeing, obviously the e-fuels will not solve the current issue of availability and supply of natural gas to Germany in the next 1 or 2 years. Here we're talking more about the next 5-10 years. We're going to see more and more projects being developed. But what we see is that due to the currently geopolitical situation with the Ukraine war, the interest in Power-to-X solutions has increased. First, because yes, we need to go into Power-to-X and decarbonization as in order to tackle climate change, but also the price difference between the green fuels and the conventional natural gas and conventional LNG is becoming smaller and smaller. And we have seen now price spikes in the gas market where hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives would already be competitive. So at least attractiveness is growing, and we're seeing a push that these things are being considered now more seriously than before the Ukraine war began.
Eric, please specify, you've been talking about triple-digit megawatt projects. Where are they? Where do you see them?
Well, understanding that we're talking about commodities, and commodities at the end, apart from the CO2 footprint, they're just being differentiated by the price. So you would always try to put the plants, the production plants for hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, to wherever you have the cheapest cost of production, which means we're looking, when we talk about hydrogen, to areas where we can, if possible, connect it to a hydrogen pipeline. We talk about derivatives, they're easily transportable via ship. So we're looking at best conditions worldwide for renewable energy, which are in the Americas. We have Patagonia, we have Mexico, US, we have in Africa, Northern Africa, Maghreb, South Africa, Namibia, we have Australia, we have obviously as well Northern Europe. So all those regions with best conditions of renewable energy. and cheapest price for renewable electricity and highest capacity factors. Those are the most important factors to get cheapest costs of hydrogen produced.
All right. So let's look again at the Power-to-X process itself. The project can either use renewable energy, but also use just any electricity from the grid, or possibly nuclear energy, to produce hydrogen and further ammonia and other e-fuels. Please specify which process is most attractive in terms of cost, time to market, and offtake. Both Eric and Jeff, I would like to ask you about that. Maybe Eric, you start, and then Jeff, you jump in.
Okay, I just began to explain at the end, you need cheapest cost of energy going into the electrolysis at the highest capacity factor possible. Those are the most important factors that contribute to the cost of hydrogen produced. So you need obviously to have CO2-free electricity, because otherwise you're not producing a green product, and it would even be worse than just using the fossil fuel directly. And that means we're trying to get the best combination of wind and solar. In some areas, like in Patagonia, wind is already sufficiently good enough that you don't need additional solar. Otherwise, it's usually a combination of both. Nuclear energy, if we talk about new nuclear plants, this may be a topic for those countries that have really very bad conditions for renewable energy and no possibility to get other source of CO2-free electricity. But I expect that the cost for pink hydrogen produced out of nuclear energy will always be higher than the costs from green electricity. It depends very much how it's the outcome in terms of cost per kilowatt hour for nuclear energy for the future nuclear technologies. Jeff?
Thanks, Eric. You know, that's a really good point. I would say certainly from one perspective, nuclear as well as dedicated renewables go together. And one of the things that I see relative to nuclear is in various markets, and I can speak to the United States here, where nuclear power plants are being asked to either cycle or drop their load to be able to take on the intermittent renewables at peak times of the day. And that, with a fixed cost in a nuclear facility, that only drives the cost up. What we're seeing, what I see is just a perfect match, where as renewables are brought forward for various uses, and whether this is power to X or for electricity, nuclear can, rather than be curtailed, that excess energy can be used to generate hydrogen. One could call it pink hydrogen. I prefer to call it clean hydrogen. And that can be used from a power generation perspective, a matter of grid scale energy storage. So I like it. In terms of the cost, it really depends on the incentives. And I know we're going to be talking about that quite a bit, but depending on the financial guidelines and the incentives, you end up having some choice in terms of how you're going to generate this green hydrogen, or clean hydrogen, if you will.
So, Jeff, if I understand you correctly, you're saying we don't necessarily need renewables. The nuclear to scale up the process might just as well do it, if not even better, in a short period of time, because there's more availability of nuclear around there.
Yeah, so I would say no, scaling up of renewables is actually completely key as we move forward in this power to X transition. What I see is the movement from intermittency, leveraging the intermittency of renewables, towards dedicated renewables for power to X. That I think is key. If I look in the United States, there's less than 200 gigawatts, which is about 20% of the installed capacity are renewables. That's not nearly enough for what we need. We need to think about dedicated renewables. I know in Europe, particularly in Spain, there are companies looking at dedicated solar with some backstop to ensure some reliable and consistent power to put forward a power to X model with competitive priced hydrogen.
Good. This leads us directly into the next questions. How do project economics and lead times differ in various regions? Let's compare the United States, Europe, the Middle East, but also Australia and Asia. Jeff, could you please talk us through this?
Sure. Well, this is what's really exciting. Certainly a lot of dynamics in this particular area over the past several months. In the United States, the government has put together what I would call the carrot approach. In other words, there will be production tax credit incentives for the generation of clean hydrogen. The cleaner it is, the higher the production tax credit. What's also quite interesting in order to support this and the build out of renewables necessarily for green hydrogen is a tying not only of investment tax credits to battery and solar, but also battery and wind. And that will simply allow an expanded growth of more renewables at good cost. If I look at the price of renewables today, I look at what's happening in both Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where unsubsidized levelized cost of electricity is about $10 or call it 10 euros per megawatt. And that is unsubsidized, so we know that the cost basis is there to build out the necessary baseline for clean hydrogen. If I look at Europe, I see, and I'm sure my other colleagues here will speak to it as well. Also, there's an incentive in terms of price to pollute. There is a carbon tax, which is a little bit of the stick in order to help drive the cost down and to build up the technologies and investments forward. But clearly, the investments are happening today, driving down the overall costs. So I'm encouraged by what we're seeing, but it's just a beginning. One thing I will state that's important to recognize, particularly in the United States, when we talk about incentives for clean hydrogen, it's been 30 years worth of incentives, production tax credits and incentives for wind in the United States alone. It continues today. So to think that that this is a one and done or an early infancy type of support structure to drive scale and drive the technology is really not the way to look at it. It's going to take sustained and continue investment.
Right. Christoph, can I bring you in? Do you see an area where Power-to-X is already a reality today without any subsidies?
Well, thank you. Since Anja, since you attached me to the aviation sector, obviously you are expecting a reply with reference to aviation. But honestly, what Jeff just said, you know, we are looking at conditions that make it incredibly difficult to basically launch a completely new market, new products with new conditions and new players. While we have the old players, the incumbents that are trying everything to maintain their existing business models and their existing revenue streams. So this translates into lobby groups, and both lobby groups are, you know, attacking our dear politicians on the national and regional and European level, of course, trying to argue that only their case is the right case. So as much as we wish, what Jeff just has described is what we currently see, green bucks, green capital likes to be invested in the US right now, because after years, if not decades, of European homework, the US is obviously acting faster, smarter, probably more entrepreneurial and less administrative, less politically, you know, infected, but more entrepreneurial minded. And this is currently having a huge impact on players, manufacturers, new energy participants in the market to focus on where the conditions are best. To answer your question, can we do it alone without any incentive whatsoever? It's difficult. It is difficult, but also, to be honest, we see end customers of P2X end products that are so desperate to prove to their owners, shareholders, clients that they have understood the message of what decarbonization means, that this translates into a willingness to accept a price premium. And this price premium, obviously, has to be digested by the market. If not, if there is no market, no customer willing and capable of digesting this price premium, we will have to cover the delta with any kind of public grant support, and all the beautiful portfolios of government support you can imagine.
So basically, there's a desperate need to get the costs down. So we are partly helped by the expensive LNG, which renders fossil fuels more expensive, but we desperately need to get the costs of synthetic fuels down. So how can this be done? Can it be done by simply scaling up the Power-to-X ventures, or by improving their efficiency, or by implementing new technology? I read today that some technology is using less iridium, so this might bring the costs down. Carsten, can you help us with this?
I think if you look at the cost structure of green hydrogen, is dominated by electricity currently, plus the technology of converting it. But in most countries, production is actually dominated by electricity. So the first pathway towards cost down is scaling in larger units. That drives the technology cost down. But the power actually is the most important part. So we need to build up renewable energy, and renewable energy production is competing direct electricity use versus feeding it into the electrolyzer. So as soon as we have more electricity or dedicated plants available in large scale, then we can expect cost down of the green hydrogen.
Okay. Can we look at the future demand for synthetic fuels, please? Which industry is the main off-taker? I start with you, Christoph. How would you compare the demand of the aviation industry to, let's say, the petchem or the power generation industry?
Let's put it this way, P2L derived e-fuels and P2L derived e-kerosene, I would call, is a new white elephant in the room. Everyone wants it, but nobody has ever seen it. So I would say the delta between supply and demand is so huge that basically a lot of people, customers, don't really know what they are talking about. And you see that, for example, in discussions with off-takers, i.e. airlines, when they are asking at the end of a nice introduction, say, oh, by the way, is P2L derived e-kerosene, or as we like to call it, eSAF, sustainable aviation fuels, and the E is indicating, the electricity, a renewable electricity origin, which is separating water and producing the green hydrogen. They say, well, is it actually more expensive than conventional kerosene? That shows you the total misconception and the misunderstanding of how this market, and our, I should say, new market and new products, how they work, what the key conditions are, what the new parameters are. So there is a lot of educational work to be done to assist before we assist the off-takers and the clients. I feel tempted to also say assist the regulators. We've just seen, an incredible mess up on the EU level by, this beautiful subject relating to additionality. Additionality in a nutshell describes, when is energy actually green? So when are we allowed and authorized to call hydrogen green hydrogen? There were so many conditions that made it difficult for this industry and key industry players willing to take a risk to actually take an investment decision, that finally, upon a very clear message from the EU Parliament, the EU Commission was forced to step back and say, wait a second, we're here to ramp up, to encourage the ramp up of a new market. Maybe we should practice a little bit more laissez-faire at the beginning to give this market a chance to develop. So this is a huge challenge, and you know, the prepared and educated players in the market are aware of this, and they are betting big time on the availability of large-scale fuel e-kerosene in the future, with all the caveats that have been mentioned by my colleagues here. You know, once we get the grid locks, and especially the availability of affordable energy in place.
So one industry which is actually very keen on rushing towards hydrogen co-firing is the power generators. And the engine and turbine manufacturers, they're competing to add hydrogen and other ammonia and other green fuels to the combustion process. So Eric, I know you're representing one of them, but just give us a fair overview of what rate can realistically be achieved at the moment.
Yes, at the moment for our portfolio of gas turbines, we can offer between 30 and 75% volume percentage of hydrogen blending into the fuel, into natural gas. And we're working very much on increasing those levels to up to 100%. We are planning to demonstrate the first 100% operation of a gas turbine with hydrogen next year already. For the medium-sized turbines, we expect to have them probably around 2025, and for the very large turbines, we will probably be the last ones to go into hydrogen operation. We expect to have it by the end of the decade. That's currently the plan. The biggest issue is here as well, not just the technology itself, it's more about infrastructure, and do we have the sufficient amount of hydrogen available?
Yeah.
With the complete hydrogen infrastructure with gas pipelines, because you cannot run a large gas pipeline with hydrogen being transported via trucks. You need a connection to the pipeline, and that includes as well underground storage because of the high seasonality of production and use of hydrogen.
So other than in decentralized projects where you add a power plant next to the place where the hydrogen is actually produced, will we ever see 100% hydrogen co-firing? Because in my view, there is not enough hydrogen out there, and the transport, as you said, is a problem.
Well, obviously there are plans, at least in Europe, to have a complete hydrogen backbone network being ramped up over the next 10-20 years. What we expect is that although we might see occasionally re-electrification units, power plants to be built next to the electrolysis, quite often we're going to see a separation of both. So we'll have production of hydrogen wherever you have the best conditions for renewable energy, which in case of Europe, it could be maybe Northern Africa, could be north of Europe, and we'll have the re-electrification units close to the centers of consumption, which are the large cities, especially because we also need to produce heat at the same time as power with hydrogen. Remember that we will be switching mostly to an electric heating system for most of the applications in residential and industrial heat with heat pumps. And if we don't have sufficient renewable energy in the grid, we not only have the reason to run the gas turbines with hydrogen, but also we need to provide the heat in a different way. And so we have to combine the production of residual load and the residual heat at the same time.
Right. We actually have the first question from the audience. Other than hydrogen, somebody's asking if Siemens is working on an ammonia-driven turbine for power plants, or possibly for jet engines for aviation.
Yeah, obviously on the jet airplanes, that's probably more for Christoph to answer, but on other fuels than hydrogen, we know that there always will be some customers, some regions that will not have access to pipeline-fed green hydrogen. Think about island grids, think about countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. These are areas with not very good conditions for renewable energy. And because there are islands, they will probably not be able to connect to a hydrogen backbone network. In those cases, we have to look into other green fuels. And we definitely are looking at all different options. That includes biofuels, and we already are running the first power plants on 100% HVO, for instance. We're looking as well as at hydrogen derivatives like methanol, which might be very interesting, very attractive as well for the future operation of island grids. And we're also looking at ammonia, because ammonia will be one of the potential energy vectors for hydrogen. And here, because of the issues associated with the direct combustion of ammonia, we're probably heading more towards a combination of cracking of ammonia and combustion of a dissociated ammonia. That means H2 and N2. We've already done first tests with excellent results and can already offer today 50% ammonia blending. Obviously cracked ammonia blending into natural gas, and we're going to increase that to 100% very quickly as well.
Okay.
Christoph, on the aviation?
Sure, I'm happy to appease the member of the audience with regard to hydrogen in aircrafts, and especially any change or modification of engines. The good news is we're talking so-called drop-in fuels. Drop-in means that hydrogen that is converted, green hydrogen that is converted in a relatively complex process into synthetic crude and then upgraded to certified jet fuel, does not require any modification whatsoever of existing aircraft engines. To put this into a perspective, the technology to fly a plane, to fly an aircraft, 747, A350, B777, is more than 60 years old. We have a beautiful interior, nice design, but we fly with pretty old engines. Problem is there are more than 35,000 airplanes out there, and more than 20,000 at any given time are in the air. So no one has the means, the capacity, and definitely not the capital available to overhaul and change this existing infrastructure that has been built up over decades. The last major infrastructure change we've seen is when airports were forced to build bridges to serve the A380, the double-decker, the Airbus double-decker. So keeping this in mind, and you know, with a side note, side message to hydrogen, pure hydrogen powered aircraft, it is often reported as the next best, next big thing. It sounds good on paper, it sounds good from a technology perspective, but it may work for aircraft the size of drones or small little taxi or commuter aircraft, because other than that, just the density, the energy density, and the ratio between volume, space, weight, and fuselage design does not make it a feasible option to power, especially a wide-body jet with hydrogen only. So e-fuels are a hydrogen derivative, as has been mentioned many times. E-kerosene is a hydrogen derivative, and this is the next best thing to power large passenger aircraft with hydrogen without any modification whatsoever in terms of engine technology.
Good.
Anja,
yes.
could I take a crack at the question about
absolutely. I was just about to ask you.
Okay, great.
About the hydrogen-ready equipment and about the scale of the retrofits of existing gas power stations. Yes, I've not forgotten about that.
I did want to raise the question about ammonia, particularly for use in gas turbines. You know, our company, we're owned by a South Korean conglomerate, Hanwha, And as Eric had mentioned, if we look at Asia, Japan, parts of Japan or South Korea or Taiwan, they will continue to be importing their fuel or their fuel. And in this particular case, this will be more than likely being transported as clean ammonia. I think just in the paper a week or so ago, there was an announcement that the UAE shipped their first ammonia shipment to Germany. So we're seeing ammonia as an excellent energy carrier. And for the United States, particularly with the amount of natural gas that can be used to generate this clean ammonia, we're seeing a huge export market for use in power to gen. And again, as Eric mentioned, you can crack it at the point of it being put into the network. From our standpoint, from retrofits of existing gas turbines, ammonia represents a challenge, particularly due to the way it combusts with the tremendous amounts of oxides of nitrogen, which is a regulated pollutant because of the impacts on public health. So from a retrofit standpoint, there needs to be appropriate plant modifications, cost being a big issue, that would allow that to be continued to be controlled. So that's the point from ammonia. So we are looking at ammonia. We do see a pathway for 100% ammonia, recognizing that we will have to address the oxides of nitrogen, and seeing that it would be for what I would call very specific applications. Mm-hmm. We have 5 years of burning, co-firing hydrogen and natural gas in our combustion drop-in retrofits. This is something that's given us the confidence. These are refinery off-gas applications. So when we talk about where is the hydrogen coming from, refinery off-gas is predominantly hydrogen, particularly at refineries. They're unable to flare it. They need to do something with it. What better way than to provide it to a power producer that may be providing steam for that plant? So our initial successes and the ones that will be going in this year recognize refinery off-gas as where the hydrogen is coming from. So from that standpoint, going to 100%, we're focusing on smaller machines to get, because of the issue with hydrogen. Where is it going to come from? Is it going to be clean? Yes. And look at peaker applications to address the intermittency issue first. So it's going to take time to build out the infrastructure. And I'm very encouraged by what Netherlands is doing, what Germany is doing, and they're really giving some impetus to what's being done in the United States in that regard.
Right. Eric, you would like to add to this as well?
Exactly. Adding to Jeff, one additional issue that we see with ammonia is the toxicity of the fuel. And you really need to take care that you don't get into any ammonia emissions outside of the power plant. Obviously, inside the power plant, you also need to handle it if you have a toxic fuel, but thinking that all potential operating conditions like trip, like fail starts, we see extreme strong ammonia slip limits in legislation, and we cannot really afford any sort of high ammonia slips because of a fail start in the future. So that's also a potential showstopper for a direct combustion. We can handle it easier with cracked ammonia. And I agree as well what you said on the refinery of gases. In fact, our two most interesting projects where we're currently demonstrating high amounts of hydrogen combustion are exactly these cases. It's refinery off gases with a very high hydrogen concentration and very few inerts, so very representative for a hydrogen natural gas mixture. And in Brazil, we're currently running very recently a power plant with two SGT 600s, 30 megawatt turbines each, running at 60% hydrogen, and in the top we have achieved even 88% hydrogen. But I have to admit that was at the flammability limits and flashback limits of the power plant.
Then there's another question from the audience, which I would like to add directly in here. Somebody saying there are blending issues with blending hydrogen into natural gas. So there's leakage due to hydrogen densities, sea leakage. They are writing increased compressor demand, and only up to 15% blending could be easily accepted. And above that, there would be problems with hydrogen pipelines. Do you agree with this? Because you guys have been talking for up to 100% hydrogen co-firing. So if there's already problems with the pipeline and with the transport, then this is a far off road.
I can speak to this, Anya, if you don't mind. So it's a very good question, and one of the things that is the initial discussions is how much hydrogen can you blend in a natural gas pipeline, and not be concerned about the type of sealing that you have, the type of compression that you have, and then there's the issue of that hydrogen could embrittle the steel being used to deliver it. So what I see is a model, even in the United States, where certain pipelines can be retrofitted to take hydrogen, but to deliver hydrogen, just as they're building the backbone in the Netherlands and Germany at the moment, dedicated hydrogen pipelines for that being piped to, say, a power plant. That will and the thing is that, is this a problem? Well, the answer is not really. I mean, companies such as Air Liquide, Air Products, and Linde, for example, have for decades been distributing hydrogen across thousands of miles of pipeline, even in the United States. So all the protections are there to build out the infrastructure to get it to the plant. When you get it to the plant, yes, you do the blending there locally, and then you have the fuel delivery and the fuel blending technology to deliver it into the combustor, addressing all of the required fire protections, controls, leak detection, etc. So this isn't necessarily an untried technology. Hydrogen has been burned in power plants, again, for decades as well, just not in the ways that we're talking about today with ultra low emissions as drop-ins. They've been specialized. So the technology is there. It's a matter of adaptation. And that's why I'm so optimistic that I see this as becoming one of the larger use cases that are required to build the momentum for the infrastructure investment upstream.
So you are actually seeing 100% hydrogen co-firing in gas peakers?
Not in peakers today. No, these would be typically in refineries where they're burning hydrogen. When I'm talking about centralized or decentralized or centralized power generation, the 100% hydrogen needs to be done without diluents, which is water, basically to reduce the firing temperature, which can reduce NOx. You need to do it organically in the combustor with hydrogen. And as Eric mentioned, there are challenges. This is not where you can add some minor adaptation to an existing combustion architecture. This needs to be rethought to be able to burn 100% natural gas as we go through this transition, all the way up to 100% hydrogen in any variable amount in between. This will allow the asset owner to be able to use it, and in essence, is future-proof this asset and be part of the energy transition. And that's what we see in the United States, and I certainly see an opportunity, very good opportunity in Europe as well.
And apart from the refineries, who will be next? Which ones will be next? The smaller ones, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Eric, you meant, yeah. I'll provide my input here first. It will be demonstrations and pilots first.
Right.
And what we're seeing is the opportunity for perfectly located or installed assets, smaller assets to address peaking, where you might run the turbine for 4 or 6 or 5 hours. These are the types of volumes of hydrogen to approach 100% and get to 100%. Many of the smaller machines we will have in operation and demonstrated by 2024 for 100%. The issue, of course, is 1, addressing the business case, 2, how are they going to run it? And then, of course, there needs to be the element of carbon allowances, or the price to pollute, as each of the asset owners of the power producers are looking and have committed to driving down their carbon intensity. So it's the right price of hydrogen in the right quantities, addressing even the exhaust from a price to pollute mechanism.
Sure. All right. Let's look at the shipping industry. Florian, the shipping industry is also rushing to embrace e-fuels. Is there a specific future fuel which will make the race? And also, there is a question from the audience. They are asking, will it be possible to reach the IMO's goal of 50% CO2 reduction in the maritime sector by 2050, excuse me, without drastically scaling up nuclear power to enhance the production of Power-to-X?
Yeah.
So, Florian.
So these are three questions. Maybe I can start with, well, relating to what is already in the question. So the industry is embracing e-fuels, yeah, for a good reason, because there are drivers, there are limits for CO2 reduction by the IMO, as mentioned in the third question. There is EU limiting goals, and worldwide level we will see a lot of pressure. So for a good reason, shipping industry is embracing e-fuels, because there is no alternative. So a direct electrification of a 20,000 TEU container ship is not an option, obviously. Then the second question was, which future fuels will make the race? So it's a plural already, yes. There will be not one fuel which will make the race, not one winner, but more. Application specific. So if you look, for instance, when it comes to the different fuels, ammonia, as already mentioned by one of my colleagues here correctly, it's a very harmful, very dangerous element. So obviously we will not see ammonia, at least in my opinion, on a large scale in passenger shipping. So, but for container shipping, it is one very good way to decarbonize, or to have a carbon-free fuel solution. So, but just to connect it not only with an opinion, but also with facts, we will have the first commercial projects with ammonia-powered large ship engines, so the two-stroke engines, so container ships or bulk carriers and such a kind. We will have from 2024, 2025 on with MAN engines. So there will be one application. Of course, it will start with green ammonia carriers as an application, but we will see a rollout with the availability of green ammonia worldwide. So this is also a factor. Another fuel, another candidate, obviously, is methanol. We already have projects with methanol powered two-stroke engines. So the large Maersk shipping company has 12 engines of such a kind. So here we also have a certain application. And methanol is also an option, of course, for passenger shipping. So we will see, for instance, in cruise shipping, we will also see methanol ships. But if you look at today's situation, or the starting point, more than 90% or a lot, mostly ships are powered by heavy fuel oil, by diesel engines. And this is a little bit also relating to what Christoph said about the aviation industry. So you cannot transform it within a few years, because you have a very large population of existing ships and engines on the seas. There are more than 9,000 engines by MAN alone on the oceans, and they all need a transition phase. So for this, the factor future-proof assets, retrofitability, converting existing engines into e-fuel engines is another key factor. And for this, I also have a very nice actual example of a project with a ship called Elk Blue. It's a 1,000 TEU feeder ship in the North Sea. It was built in 2011 with a heavy fuel oil engine. then we would convert it into an LNG powered ship in 2017. So you could use an existing ship and convert it into with another fuel option. And then we had in 2021, so with 10 years of age, the ship was first cruising carbon neutral by fueling with synthetic methane produced in our Werte plant in northern Germany. So this is a MAN methanation. So you can see we are not only making prognosis and telling what the boundaries are, but we are able to really show physically a ship sailing with carbon neutral synthetic methane.
Actually,
So,
there's somebody asking, what is the potential for retrofitting 4-stroke engines running on MGO to methanol, and can this be done at scale?
yeah, this definitely can be done at scale. So a very good question, and very important to underline, every engine which is being built today needs to be retrofittable for e-fuels, for carbon neutral or carbon-free fuels. So this is in the DNA of every MAN engine supplied today. So this is for the application, and of course, what are the factors which will, coming back to the question, which will lead to an answer, which future fuel will not make the race alone, but be like a very strong winner in that race, is of course the availability, global availability of this specific fuel on a worldwide basis at the low cost. And this also maybe addresses the third question about building up nuclear power. In my opinion, on a worldwide level, there is plenty of renewable energy available. So we will not need nuclear power, in my opinion, because as Carsten also elaborated earlier, we are able to produce the synthetic fuels in a global green hydrogen and e-fuel economy and a value chain, and transport them to the respective points of use. So I'm very optimistic that we are able to base also the decarbonization of the shipping industry on renewable energy.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are questions out there on e-kerosene. So I will shift and take the aviation question first. So Christoph, where are the e-fuels for aviation being produced? So what locations do we have? What are the key bottlenecks and what cost considerations do we have? And now looking at the audience, they are asking what is the reasonable size for an e-kerosene refinery? So can you please combine these questions?
As has been mentioned before, one of the key ingredients that we need to secure is a lot of renewable energy. And in renewable energy that is affordable and renewable energy that is available. And I think no one has mentioned yet the competitive case for the available renewable energy. So there is the policy goal to decarbonize the grid. When we come in to build e-fuel production facilities, we are potentially taking away existing renewable energy assets in order to, we're diverting existing renewable energy for an alternative use case. And I can, sorry, you want to?
Yeah. So if we don't have enough renewables, are we not forced to use nuclear? I get the sense.
It's, if you look at the origin of what happened, that nuclear became ultimately, was accepted by the EU Commission as sort of green. Look at France today. France has 50+ nuclear power plants. How many of these power plants are in operation? 20+. Do you know why? And what has changed? You are all aware of the huge fires during this last summer. Independent of technology glitches with individual power plants, nuclear energy needs cooling. And how do you cool? With water. Where do you get the water from? Rivers. Now, a large percentage of the fish population in French rivers has already died because of an increase in temperature of the water used for cooling. Now, what has the French government done? They just changed the law for 3 months, saying for 3 months, we accept that the average water temperature of our dear rivers can exceptionally increase by 3 or 4 degrees, allowing at least the remaining 20 ex-nuclear power plants to continue operation. Otherwise, they would have been forced to delete even more, to take even more plants off the grid. So nuclear is a double-edged sword to some extent. I would be careful. Yes, fact is we do not have enough renewables at this point in time. That definitely is a bottleneck, and it is one of the largest bottlenecks and an expensive bottleneck. And with a war going on, it is even more expensive than we thought it would be like 2 years ago. So getting to your
So where are the e-fuels actually being produced?
I don't know if the audience is aware, there's 2 pilot plants, 2 worldwide global pilot plants that coincidentally both exist in Germany. One in Welte, which was inaugurated October last year by Angela Merkel. And so this is pilot plant number 1. The second one was inaugurated in Hamburg, in the ports of Hamburg, September 14 this year. So what a pilot plant is all about, it's a pilot, it's a reference case, relatively small numbers. Both of these plants are more or less twins, same technology as we have Eric here from Siemens Energy. Eric, I'm sure you know the electrolyzers that are being used and have been used, at both locations. The production volume per year is 350 tons. That is nothing. To give you an idea what 350 tons means, 350 tons of end product will ultimately be converted into a few barrels of synthetic fuel. It was enough for Lufthansa Cargo to completely repaint one of their cargo aircraft, an A350, saying, they were so keen and so proud to finally announce to the market that we have secured a few liters. I'm being a little bit sarcastic here. We have secured a few liters, and that's making us redesign the fuselage and the painting on the fuselage. Having said that, obviously, there was a signal into the market, and the market has listened, and the market has returned the signal. Now everyone's saying, we want this too. How fast can you produce it, and where? So message number 1, technology readiness, scale, the right scale with the right technology components. So you cannot just go into a supermarket and buy the necessary tools and say, all right, we will just double, triple, quadruple, onto, the levels that we have, that we are continuously hearing here. And these are levels, in the mega and gigawatt scale. I would like to urge all of us, the audience, to approach, or to take on a little bit a more humble approach when dealing with these super large numbers. One example, ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization for Civil Aviation, just a few days ago announced a so-called goal for 2050. They call it aspirational goal of net zero aviation. Honestly, if you're aiming at 2050, to me, that's a sign of let's party today and do our homework tomorrow. I'm not interested in 2050. I'm interested in now, 2026 and 27. If you want to build plants in 26 and 27.
So sorry to interrupt. Today, now, what is the size of an e-kerosene refinery? What size can we do now and today?
Based on what I tried to describe, that you have natural limitations. Limitation is, as Eric knows, the availability of manufacturing capacity of electrolyzers, the availability of catalyst, iridium. You mentioned iridium. There's only 5 tons, 6 tons of iridium produced globally, worldwide. So that's a super scarce noble metal. Availability of electricity, permitting processes, grid infrastructure, putting all of that together, and then readiness to deliver. We're looking at something like 20 to 40,000 tons per year production capacity. So just to put things into perspective, that is not yet an awful lot, but any number significantly larger than that is probably missing out on a great deal of homework.
Thanks for this number. Thank you very much. So I'd like to, Carsten, I've seen you, but let me go first right to Eric to ask, can you give me a similar number for road transport? So if we're looking at using offshore wind for producing e-fuels for road transport in Chile, what number do we get out of there? Is this more than what Christoph just mentioned?
Yeah, we're currently building the Haruoni project, which is a power-to-X project based on wind power, dedicated wind. And it's also only a demonstration project. We're talking about 3-4 megawatts of wind power to be converted to e-methanol and to e-gasoline. Off-taker is a German car manufacturer, but this is a pure demonstration project. We're at the same site, we're currently developing 2 additional commercial phases. The first one with around 300 megawatts of wind, and the second phase with 2.4 gigawatts. Those are already a little bit more commercial scales. Here we're talking about up to 55 million liters of e-fuels a year. Obviously, it's small. But what we're going to see is more and more projects of this size popping up, because you have to go really into the several hundreds of megawatts to gigawatt size to make it optimized from a cost configuration. Many of these e-fuel productions involve refining steps, and doing it very small is not really very cost effective.
Right, and I take it to produce it at scale, you need to go far afield to windy locations in Patagonia or possibly Australia. So car manufacturers will have to import all their fuels from these remote locations.
On the car industry, obviously the battery electric car is always the better option in order to decarbonize the road transport. E-fuels might be an option to at least reduce the CO2 emissions from the existing fleet, because we're going to have a very large fleet of conventional cars with internal combustion engines for the next 30 years, and we also need to get that down as quickly as possible. But for new cars, it's obviously first battery cars. And from all the e-fuels, I would see aviation one of the most attractive ones, because that's where we see the very first moves by legislation to enforce blending of RFNBOs, renewable fuels of non-biological origin. And EU Parliament is currently proposing a 5.7% blending requirement by 2030. And that is what creates markets. And then airlines will be forced to buy off-take agreements with producers for these sort of fuels. Remember, they're always more expensive today, and they will remain more expensive for a certain number of years, until eventually economies of scale, economies of number, higher CO2 certificates will make these fuels competitive with the gray ones. We'll see something similar to what happened with renewable energy, with wind power and PV power. 20 years ago, they were extremely expensive, and now they are much cheaper than the conventional ones. So we're going to see a similar evolution as well over time. Remember that all these technologies are at the beginning of their technology learning curve. And I fully agree with Christoph and all the others that are a little bit skeptical today. But that's usually what happens with new technologies. People tend to overestimate the potential of these new technologies short term, but they tend to underestimate it long term. And that's something that we need to look at as well. Yeah? So there is a little bit of hype at the moment in the hydrogen world, but on the long term, I think that's the right way to go.
All right. I still want to ask Carsten. He wanted to add something at some point. Was it with regards to the renewables built out, Carsten?
It was related to the renewables, but Eric just mentioned it. So it's about, well, if we want to fulfill the decarbonization targets, it's about building a lot of electricity sources, be it nuclear or be it renewables, but then probably market will win and we choose the cheapest ones, and that's renewables.
Good. All right. So this brings me right to the outlook section. There is a tendency that today's gas supply gap will only lead to a short-term shift towards LNG, but then accelerate the renewables built out, which we need for the e-fuels. Do we need significantly further incentives, such as subsidies or supportive regulations? And if so, which ones? What do we need? Jeff, can you answer this one, please?
Sure. So I think the answer is yes, we do need incentives, and there's basically two. What type of incentives, and what are going to be the incentives to drive the infrastructure upstream? And what I mean by that is who's going to be investing, particularly in the United States, where we see a blue bridge to green, which will drive the cost and scale of the infrastructure and drive the overall cost of hydrogen to levels that can find the right business cases for the right off-takers. In the United States, I think one of the main ones today are going to be large trucking transport along the interstate highways. I think cars will likely go the battery route, but the incentives are in place. The money decisions are being made. The investment is being made as well. Additionally, in the United States, just within the past month or so, has been the release for proposals for what's called hydrogen hubs. This is another major catalyst to drive various technologies within regions where there is a bit of difference. In some cases, in parts of the country, it could be based on natural gas. In other parts of the country, it would be renewables to hydrogen. I think nuclear also, we have almost 100 nuclear reactors in the United States. Only 2 currently being built right now, but small modular reactors is being looked at by a number of utilities as a way to reduce overall carbon intensity. What I see that is also required from an incentive standpoint is a price to pollute, or you could call it a carbon tax, whatever euphemism works. But there needs to be that element which will encourage the speed from which the technology will be adopted, and for there to be commitments on large scale offtake. So that's what I see. I think I can have some of my colleagues speak to that in Europe as well.
Florian and Christoph, do you agree? Do we need that price to pollute for the shipping industry and for aviation for them to truly embrace green fuels? Florian first.
Yeah, a very good question. Yeah, I would say in order to create a level playing field for pricing in the feature of being
I cannot hear you properly. Dear Christoph, please step in. I cannot hear Florian anymore.
We need some sort of.
So I'll step in for a second.
Yes,
taxation, favor that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, please step in. Please step in.
I fully agree with what Jeff has nicely summarized. Think of the CO2 price as a parking ticket. You know, if the ticket is just too cheap, you will continue parking on the sideway where you're not supposed to park. You just think my time is more valuable and I accept that damage and I'll still continue doing it. When it has reached a certain level that appeals to your bad conscience, I may drive into a garage or I may even leave my car at home. So the metamorphosis of prices of carbon pricing we've seen over the last, let's say, 18 months is already phenomenal. And if you look at the perspective, we're looking not only at 100, 150, but in theory up to more than $1,000 per ton of CO2. So this is one very big and super important element to assist reducing the price delta between alternative fuels and conventional fuels. So definitely, Jeff, full support on that point. Second observation, if you just see what has happened on the EU level 10 days ago, the announcement of European Hydrogen Bank. Ultimately, the regulator, the political level has realized, we cannot just announce the opening of a new market, but we will leave it to itself. And, we open the door, but there is no additional hand-holding. The European Hydrogen Bank will also assist in, providing, I think they mentioned initially up to 3 billion euros support to also reduce the delta between levelized cost of production and the cost the market is actually capable of affording. We're talking about aviation here today. We're talking about airlines. Airlines are basically walking dead from a financial perspective. They are having huge liabilities. The leasing cost, the personal cost, the hedging cost for fuel. So the CFO of an airline has a hell of a job to do. And if you remember, like Lufthansa and Air France were both saved with government funds by about 7 billion euros not so long ago. So their ability to be able to afford something just because it's green and nice and super sustainable, they first need to live to be able to pay for it. So someone will have to come in, interfere, intervene, and extend, a hand to actually allow this transition to a new market with new products and a new pricing scheme.
Sure. All right, let's try to be optimistic and assume we will have a sufficiently high enough carbon price. We will have supportive regulation and we will have a faster renewables built out. So Eric, assuming all these positive ingredients, where will the industry be in 5 years' time?
Probably in a completely different way of where it is today. We're going to see more commercial projects over there. We're going to see more projects in the pipeline. Will be challenging to get those through all the processes and permitting, and finally as well manufacturing. And I'm sure also that even we as experts will also have changed a couple of opinions. So things are moving very quickly, and I usually tell everybody my presentation of today will look different than what it looked last year, and it will also look different to what it will be in 1 year time. Things are moving quick, so we have to be open for change as well.
So thank you for this, and I suspect we should all meet in 6 months' time and look at the issue again, because there's plenty of scope out there. And thanks to sector coupling, we can spread the benefits of renewables across various sectors, be it shipping, be it aviation, be it power generation. So thank you, everybody, for a very lively and good discussion. And I hope to see several of you in a future panel discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Anja.
Thank you, Anja.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.